let's actually do this for a second. Mike Pompeo is a extraordinarily dangerous person, and always has been. He was the Koch brothers congressman. He was head of the CIA. He's a extreme far-right corporatist, but I think he also has some quite Pencean, extreme apocalyptic religious views. And he has been obviously very aggressive. And we have to look, too. I mean, the announcement of keeping troops in Iraq to keep an eye on Iran should be setting off every type of alarm bell imaginable. Trump has been making noises and threats about a coup in Venezuela from the beginning. Let's just reiterate this again. You can have critiques of Maduro. You can have critiques of Chavez. I happen to think Chavez is a very defensible figure, but a far from perfect one. And you can also recognize the fact that, look, the actual problems in Venezuela, including corruption, cartels, and all the rest of it, none of this is going to be solved or changed by a far-right government backed by the United States and Brazil and Colombia. I think that should go without saying, with a point person whose history is death squads in the 80s and Elliot Abrams. So that's why we oppose this coup effort in Venezuela, full stop. Full stop. And we can have the conversations about Venezuela and the debates and so on. That's great. U.S. intervention there, we oppose, full stop. Also, the remnants of the accomplishments, which have been greatly depreciated in the last several years as a result of both sanctions and economic warfare and the failures of Maduro, would be almost certainly eliminated in a U.S.-backed government. There still are some achievements that live on there in terms of some cooperatives on a local scale. But you can tell that the administration's pulling out the heavy guns here, because this myth, this idea going back for quite some time, in an attempt to Sicario 2 freak out Americans, Mike Pompeo is on it on Fox News.
Do you have concerns that Venezuela runs the risk of turning into a no man's land, where you have these bad actors, including some with links to Hezbollah, that could be more of a threat because they're in our hemisphere?
Yeah, Trish, I'm glad you brought that up. People don't recognize that Hezbollah has active cells. The Iranians are impacting the people of Venezuela and throughout South America. We have an obligation to take down that risk for America.
Okay, so first of all, it's unfashionable to say, but Hezbollah has zero operational interest in the United States. None. Yes, in the 1980s, Hezbollah was definitely responsible for killing Marines in Lebanon. Now, that's terrible that happened. That's a bad thing. I don't want anybody to get harmed like that. But if you can't see the difference between the complicated geopolitics and guerrilla operations in a local zone versus what he's implying there, which is more like Al-Qaeda or ISIS types attacks in the United States, you're being dishonest. There is zero evidence that Hezbollah has a desire to mount some type of 9/11 style or any style attack like that in the United States. And in fact, part of this is reflecting its own shifting politics in the Middle East because of what's happening in Syria. But if I recall, Hezbollah sort of somewhat mildly criticized the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, if I recall correctly. And in a Syrian context, Hezbollah is actually, with the Iranians, protecting minority communities in certain areas from ISIS. And then the second thing is, when you say cells, you're evoking an image of like training camps. It's ridiculous. To the extent that what he's saying is remotely true, and this needs to be aggressively fact-checked, might mean that there's connections between drug trafficking routes in Venezuela and people who do finances for Hezbollah. And if that is true, then that basically could be in a statement that you probably could expand to there are relationships between drug cartel networks everywhere to everywhere. It's you. By the time you specify it, it means nothing. But he's doing his best to fearmonger.
They're in our hemisphere, though.
Right, they're in our hemisphere.
You know, Vladimir Putin's in our hemisphere.
In a big
the
way.
northern hemisphere I'm talking about. Got to worry about that too.
Got to worry about A lot of hemispheres.
That is hemispheric
A lot of
risks.
hemispheric activity. I mean, look, if you have fact check on, I have never heard, I saw one far right person from Foundation for the Defense of Democracy said something about Hezbollah in Venezuela to Vice. That was what we could find. And then there is Treasury Department, which talks about cartel activities. And again, cartel activities is a highly expansive term. And there's no doubt, I think it's quite
Tell me
well.
about it.
There's precisely. We talk about connection, possible direct or indirect connections to cartels. I'm not sure is something that this administration wants to go in. But yeah, you're calling from a 443.